We are recording.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our weekly town hall meeting on social justice and anti-racism. We are joined on behalf of the Montessori Foundation and the International Montessori Council. We're happy to welcome you and happy to introduce Dr. Cindy Acker and Sarah Vallee, who are our presenters today and will be guiding us through this important discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy now that we've kind of introduced the logistics of how to operate within this Zoom prepared environment. Cindy will have a presentation. I will upload that to the chat box as well. So you'll have a copy of that. So you don't have to, you can really tune in and listen and not have to worry about getting everything written down ahead of time. So thanks for joining us today. And Cindy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
We're going to start off with just a moment of silence, and we've done this for the past few weeks. And I want us to hold carefully the schools around the world that do not have diversity of staff or for whom there is a racist classist connection within the school where there are no Black teachers and no situations in which we see a Black teacher and a white assistant, but only the flip side of that, or just Black teachers and Black assistants. And so we want to be able to see Montessori as diverse, as desegregated. And so we're going to hold that thought, and we're also going to hold the thought of the honesty that is required for this particular session, because we're going to be talking about the classroom. And for many teachers, it is difficult to separate out their own personal sense of self from their teaching practice. And it's a piece that we're going to call on today, because we're all in a learning mode right now, and a lot of grace and understanding is required. And so we're going to hold that within this moment of silence as well. Thank you. So we're going to start with a video, and then I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation, and it's possible that I may stop at some point just to get your take on it. But I think it's important to be able to understand some factors that ultimately affect the education of children and the education and possible outcomes for people who would be teachers. And so Sarah, will you show that first one? It's a video while she's getting it ready, and you can go ahead and do that. It talks about properties. And so it's important that you can understand that that's where this gentleman is coming from in his historical analysis of the connection between what has happened with home ownership, the ability to be in a neighborhood. You can go ahead, Sarah. And how that affects education.
That any of these developers, the only way they could get the capital to build these giant subdivisions was by going to the Federal Housing Administration, submitting their plans for the development for approval of the construction materials they were going to use, the architectural design, the layout of the streets in the subdivision, and an explicit commitment not to sell a home to an African American, required by the Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration even required, as a condition of these guarantees, developers like Levitt to place a clause in the deed of every home prohibiting resale to African Americans or rental to African Americans. These deeds still exist in these homes today. They're no longer enforced, no longer enforceable, but they're still there. What was the consequence of this? Well, those homes in those days, in all of these suburbs, they sold for $10,000 or less, $8,000, $9,000 a piece. In today's money, that's less than $100,000, probably $90,000. African Americans who were prohibited prohibited. Not that they didn't want to, not because they didn't like living among whites. They were prohibited from moving into these suburbs, and they could easily afford to do so. Any working class family can afford to buy a home for $90,000, roughly twice national median income. Those homes and developments like that now sell for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 and more. The white families over the next couple of generations gained, you can do the arithmetic, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in equity. They used that equity to send their children to college, to take care of medical emergencies, to take care of economic downturns, most importantly, to bequeath it to their children, who then had down payments for their own homes. African Americans who accumulated none of that wealth as a result of this federal subsidy had none of those abilities. Today, nationwide, African American incomes are on average about 60% of white incomes. African American wealth today is 10% of white wealth. That enormous disparity between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is entirely attributable to unconstitutional federal housing policy practiced in the mid-20th century that has never been remedied. It's a constitutional violation, and of course it determines the ongoing racial inequalities we have today.
Was that surprising to anyone? And if you're still wondering how that may have affected children in education, if parents don't have the additional funds to be able to send their children to the school that they would like to have them go to, or to be able to live in the neighborhood where education is better and where economic situations are better, then it puts you at a disadvantage. And what he is describing is something that has been historic over time that has not been remedied for many, many African American families. And so that's a piece that I want you to hold on to in terms of how that affects the schools that you have and the children who are in your school, and the children who are not, or the situations that may affect the children who are in your school, your children of color. So Sarah, if you'll start the PowerPoint, that would be terrific. I'm going to give you a combination of some information that has to do with research. You can go ahead, Sarah. You can go ahead. There were two studies that were done by researchers in Ontario and Toronto that had to do with whether or not young children could recognize racial bias. And what the study ultimately ended up showing was that racial bias begins at a very young age without the experience with other race individuals. So it doesn't have anything to do with the encounters that a child may have had with someone of another race, but without that, racial bias begins at an early age. Sarah, go ahead.
So we specifically recruited non-Black minority children in this study. So this included South Asian children, Southeast Asian children, and East Asian children. And we were interested in looking at children specifically who were in an environment where they had a lot of Black friends, potentially. So in their schools, there was a very large Black population. And we were interested in these kids specifically because basically we're looking at their implicit racial attitudes towards two racial outgroups. So they don't belong to either of these groups. And we were specifically interested in knowing whether or not they would show what other kids have shown who are not in an environment with Black peers, whether or not they'd show an implicit pro-white bias from a very early age, and also whether or not this would be different across the ages. So whether older children would show the same bias as younger children. So one of the things that we found was that, consistent with previous research, we did actually find that children showed a pro-white bias, an implicit pro-white bias from early in development, so around 6 or 7 years of age. But one of the really surprising findings and kind of encouraging findings was that older children...
Go ahead. You can keep going, Sarah, and then stop it.
I'm sorry, keep going with the video?
Oh, we're not seeing the video. We're only hearing the audio.
Ah.
But you can go a few more seconds.
around 9 years of age actually showed less pro-white bias. So we think that there are aspects of their...
Thank you. And can you show the other one? I don't know why we didn't see your visual.
I don't know, but I'll try and figure out when I start this what's going on.
What we were interested in looking at was whether or not white children, when they were just sort of shown pictures of white and black children, whether on a very automatic basis they would show greater positivity towards other white children, and whether or not they would show negativity towards black children when they were just presented with these faces and not necessarily asked to categorize them by race. And so what we actually found in our research was that younger white children did actually show a racial bias, and this seemed to be driven largely by their positivity towards the white target. So they tended to be more positive towards other white kids, but they weren't necessarily automatically negative towards black kids. And so that's just really interesting to us because it gives a little bit more nuance and gives us some insight into interventions that we might want to do if we want to try to decrease prejudice and increase just an appreciation for diversity in our community. Younger kids, we actually find that they tend to be quite egocentric and quite sociocentric, which basically means they really like themselves and they really like other people who are like them. So children sort of 5 to 7 will tend to think quite positively of themselves and other people who belong to their groups, depending on how that group is defined, but that can include their racial group. And so
Sarah, you can stop that. Why don't you unshare, and it may be that when you share again, the problem will be fixed.
Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
We just see the slide. So if you can unshare. For a moment. Okay, and so what we heard, I was going to say what we saw, what we heard in that information that was shared by this particular researcher is the fact that children naturally have a bias. They begin with a bias, and that's a part of being human, that they look at what is similar to themselves and that they have a bias for that. Even if they don't have a negative bias toward someone of color, if they are a white child, they have a positive bias for someone else who is white. And she describes the fact that that is natural for children. You see what is comfortable to you, which is what you know and what you have experienced, and that you end up having a bias from the very beginning. So knowing that bit of information, that the children who come into our classrooms have come in with a bias toward the other people who they have had within their social circle, and that they have grown up with to that point, tells us that there's already work for us to do. Because we then need to do something to open up that area of bias that has been created naturally as human beings and naturally in the development of children. We have to open that up for other children. Sarah, let's go back to share and let's see if maybe you get the audio. And if we're wondering if we start off just with the bias that children have, I'd like to share this particular research that has to do with preschool teachers.
Sorry, it's this one that you're wanting to share now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me see if there's a way to. Is it coming up?
In a recent presidential debate, Hillary Clinton said,
Sorry, are you seeing the video?
We are not. We are not.
Let me see if I can figure out, move to the bottom.
Someone put in the chat that unshare the current screen and then share the video screen or tab.
Okay, let's see if that.
So somebody
I may have
has
to go back and forth
between the
sharing
two screens. It might just be the window itself.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
implicit bias is a problem for everyone and not just police. And she might be right, even where you least expect it. A recent Yale study found implicit bias in preschool teachers when it came to expecting challenging behavior from students. The study shows videos of preschoolers, played by actors, doing regular preschool activities. You know, kids being kids. Then they asked preschool teachers and administrators to identify challenging behaviors in the videos. Now there are 4 kids being monitored, 1 black boy and a black girl, and then a white boy and a white girl. The study used eye-following technology to monitor the teacher's attention. The results? The black boy required 42% of the teacher's attention, while in contrast, the white boy only needed 34% of the teacher's attention. So why are all eyes on the black boy? The study says staff observe black boys more closely when looking for, quote, challenging behaviors, and that they may have different expectations of what challenging behaviors are based on the race of that child. And we all know where this can lead. Maybe the disproportionate attention can contribute to high suspension rates, which can directly affect black boys' educational development. And it turns out black boys are 3.6 times more likely to be suspended 1 or more times than white preschoolers. And what's crazy is that these biases can follow a child into adulthood. Maybe we need restorative justice for preschools. Who knew we had to start so young?
Thank you, sir. You can unshare. So to me, what that tells us is that we have a lot of work to do, because if that is the case, that as natural as it is for children to have biases, and as natural as it is for human beings to have biases, and if it is true that then preschool teachers can, because of their human nature, also have a bias, and that bias could be racial, that is a piece that we really have to look at, and that the work begins, and Sarah, you can go back to the PowerPoint, the work begins on the very, very first day. And so if we're looking at what are some of the things that we have to do, it's looking for opportunities to connect students in different social circumstances and situations. And so we need to look at the culture of our children. We need to look at the fact that part of our work automatically is going to be to see whether or not we need to connect them together, that we have family pictures in the classroom so that other children not only see their family, but so that they see other families in the world, that we flood our school with books of people of color in all situations. And someone asked last week, what if you are in a school that is all white children? And perhaps parents might feel uncomfortable about that. And at the time I gave an example and said that when I grew up in an almost all Black school with all white literature, all white books, all white information about explorers and inventors, except for George Washington Carver. And that my entire framework was from a white perspective, and that parents at that time wouldn't have even known to have questioned it, probably because they didn't even know that they had a right or that it could have been different. And it needs to be different. It really needs to be different now. And so if anything, we let our parents know that we're correcting an injustice that has happened for years and years and hundreds of years, and that we want to flip the switch. We want to turn that around, and we want to enlighten children with information. Sarah, you can go on. We want to include information every week about people of color who created things in the environment. And I do mean that intentionally, that we provide information for children to know. You could even put things around the classroom. Who invented the chair, who invented the light switch, et cetera, and you just have that information. Just in doing that, you will bring to light people of color who were inventors, because there are many, many of them. There's a website, I can't remember the name of it, Sarah, you might know, that says what would happen if there were no Black inventors, and it takes you through a day and all of the things that would not be around if we took out all of the inventions of people who were Black. That we have ongoing training in a school, and I don't mean just one piece at the beginning of the year, and I don't mean one piece that happens during the month of February, but ongoing training about anti-racism and ways to be able to handle race and culture in the classroom. That we really use intentionality with the things that we do, and that we pay attention to the materials that are in the classroom and what we do with it. This slide talks about AVAR, which is an organization that provides information about curriculum and practices that have to do with anti-racism and anti-bias. And I use the word anti-bias with people very carefully, because I think that the term makes a lot of people think that they can operate without a bias, or that we can have a classroom without a bias, and that just isn't true. We can push back against bias, by the things that we have in the classroom. And the ABAR principles here mention 4 different things that we want children to be able to demonstrate: self-awareness, confidence, pride and positivity. And I would say that we really want to help them honor their culture and their background and their race, what creates them, that they hold an esteem and a pride about that. I can remember some children who were of various indigenous tribes who came into my elementary program and said, "Would you like to know what tribe I'm from?" And it wouldn't have hit me at the time to have even asked, but I said yes. And they knew. They knew their background. They knew what their name meant and how they needed to live into it. It was absolutely incredible, the pride that they walked in with. And that's what we want to help some children gather. And I would say that is not just for children of color, but for children who identify as white, because white is not a culture. People who are white, their families came from somewhere. And I think if we equally pay attention to all children's cultures, but that we focus on the fact that for so long we have not paid attention to the culture of people of color, I think we'll get somewhere in where we need to be with our children. And then goal 2 talks about children not only being joyful about diversity and really enjoying the fact that there are differences in their classroom, but that they will learn how to articulate that appropriately so that they don't end up with terminology that is incorrect. Number 3 mentions that they'll understand what unfairness and unjustness is, and I would say that they learn how to stand up to unjust actions and to be clear in what they say, and that they learn how not to be a bystander. And talks about that they are empowered to act. And I would say the empowerment and the ability to act. Thank you, Sarah, you can go on. And so this video is the beginning of it. We'll show a clip from my school and the fact
now teaching about tolerance
and the fact that during another period of racial unjustness, the PBS NewsHour went looking around to find out how early can we begin to change that for children? How early can we disrupt racism and unjustness? And so they ended up, among other schools, coming to my school.
to the very youngest children in school. The lessons are certainly not new, but in some communities they are taking on a new urgency and relevance in the wake of deep racial divides, social tensions, and violence around the country. Special correspondent Kat Wise visits a pair of noteworthy programs in California. It's for our weekly series, Making the Grade.
We're going to take out the mirror now, we're going to look at ourselves, and we're going to make our own face.
In this Alameda, California preschool, a box of crayons with a multitude of colors is helping little kids learn big lessons.
So put your hand and decide what you think is the best suited for you.
Teacher Tiffany Battle asks the children to look carefully at their own skin color and their classmates' skin colors.
Again, let's put our hands in.
To notice differences and similarities.
I'm black and white.
The art project is just one of many ways children are introduced to an anti-bias curriculum here at the Child Unique Montessori School, a private tuition-funded program.
Okay, so go ahead and color your skin in.
Cindy Acker is the school's founder and principal.
Within any color of someone's skin, there are many, many different colors, and so we want them to appreciate the diversity within their own individuality. And then we want them to be able to see and question other children's differences.
If you add this lighter color to it, what do you think is going to happen?
It's going to be lighter.
Yeah. We're different on the outside, but inside we have lungs, we have a heart, we have a mind, and that's the same.
Talking about racial differences is not new at the school. Acker started the program more than 30 years ago, and it was among the first of its kind in the country to focus on diversity and inclusion at such an early age. But she says the curriculum seems more important than ever.
To me, the things that are going on in the world today, give us an indication that we need a major shift in how we perceive people, how we honor people, how we treat people. And because I'm a firm believer that it begins at the preschool level, I think that that's where we need to start. Sophie, are you going to make it out?
Acker points to racial divides witnessed in recent events like the violent neo-Nazi protests in Charlottesville, Virginia, the police shootings of black men, and the debate over NFL players taking a knee to protest racism.
What we have seen is a resurfacing or a surfacing of what we thought was absent but sits within the psyche of some individuals.
One thing I've been seeing is that
Louise Sturman-Sparks.
Thank you, Sarah. You can go back to the PowerPoint. And so what I want us to be able to do is to look at some additional things that we can include within the Montessori curriculum. And these are a couple that you can just begin to look at, and then I want us to be able to talk out that and how you are feeling about this information. So paying attention to the race that is reflected, the predominant race that is reflected in your classroom. Looking at practical life, for example, if you have doll washing, what is the race of the doll of color? In language, having books in your school that reflect Black children and Black families and other cultures. And I don't mean that talk specifically about race. I think that's another thing, but to have books within your environment in which being Black happens to just be what is the situation. And it may be Sam goes to the market, but it just so happens that Sam's family is Black. And that within that you have Sam's family is Black. You have another book about a gay family. You have another book about another family that is biracial or multiracial or Asian or Pacific Islander, but that you flood your classroom with information that is going to shift the dominant culture mentality that we have right now. I mentioned placing information about inventors for children to have that kind of information, to actually name people of color who have made contributions so that children come to know who they are as well. That we look at things like people of the world cards. Years ago, when I took my Montessori training, my people of the world cards looked very particular per continent, but many different races are reflected in many different continents. And so it's just not the same anymore. That we teach real history when there is a day that shows up on the calendar, that we actually teach children the origins of that day and how we've changed in our view about that historic day, so that we can pay attention to what we need to do differently. When I was trained by Ursula used to use the expression, and then life got smarter. And maybe that's something that we need to say to children. And then life got smarter, and we discovered that that wasn't what occurred, or that wasn't exactly how that happened in history. And so now we look at that day this way. So we begin to give them the beginnings and to show them the change. That we look at music. I just did a international conference on music and racism. And it was very surprising to many teachers to discover how much there is in music that has racist backgrounds. As simple as the 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indian song, which many teachers have changed to 1 little, 2 little, 3 little children, but many people didn't know that it began as 1 little, 2 little, 3 little, the N-word. Yeah. And there are many things like that. There are many children's songs that connect with the minstrel time and that are very degrading to African Americans. And that we challenge our older students, our lower elementary and our upper elementary children, to flip the switch themselves, to do the research themselves or along with their teachers to discover what really happened in history. The students in my school have the challenge to discover the history of Alameda. And when they first started to work on it last year, they came back with a European beginning. And I said, what happened to the indigenous people who began here and were on this land first? And so they are going back. They're going back in time and trying to find out information that the city didn't even have. And within that, in that work that they were doing, they discovered that there was a part of the city that used to be called Japantown, but when Japanese internment happened, that Japanese Americans were taken away and lost their businesses and never were able to regain their homes or their businesses, and that part of the island disappeared from the culture of what was there and the contribution that Japanese Americans made. So there are things like that that children just really, they need to know the truth. And the truth is what is going to change their viewpoint about people. So Sarah, let's come out. Those are links that, if you can put those in the chat, are books about race or books about children of different races. And let me give you your homework ahead of time, and then we're going to pull out to talk to people. So if you can go to that one. If you'll also put that in the chat, that's something that I want you to really listen to this weekend. It is, I think it's about maybe an hour long, and it is primarily public school teachers who are talking about the change that needs to happen in education as it has to do with race. And I looked for Montessori teachers talking about race in education, but I couldn't find anything. And we can hold that thought and think about what's the contribution that we need to do there as well. But that's your homework for this week. And Sarah, if you can put that in the chat, we can unshare your screen. So I think I gave you a little bit to think about, and I'm curious.
This is Karen Abdallah.
And I'm curious if there are thoughts that people have that they would like to share, and what's available in the chat. And I also asked a head of school if she would speak out and talk about things that she has been doing herself or on behalf of her school that have to do with racism. And so you know who you are, and if you end up feeling comfortable, please speak out.
Yeah, and Cindy, who you're inviting to speak, if she wants to unmute herself anytime, we're happy to have her.
Oh, she has her hand up. It's Marnie.
Okay, Marnie, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I am a babe in the woods, as many of us are. And I certainly have a long way to go. But we made a decision when we opened the school 5 years ago that we would add a second classroom so that we can benefit people who need financial aid. I bought an old farmhouse, a 1782 farmhouse, and opened with 2 children and 1 colleague. And now we're going into our 5th year, and we have 40 children, and we're a fairly diverse group of faculty and children, but never enough. We only have 2 Black families in our school, and it was a wake-up call for us in the very entitled suburbs outside of Boston that there are lots of people who are not being seen. And one of the ways that we can make sure that people are being seen is to say so, to say that we're looking and that we see you and that we have a place for everyone at our school. We've kind of broke the seal. Once you go forward, you can never go back. Once you know, once life gets smarter, you can never go back again. So we have, our teachers are required to, and happily so, I believe, required to read 2 selections. They have to be about anti-racism, and they have to be written by a Black writer. We started to look at books that a lot of people enjoy, like White Fragility, and frankly, I felt like it wasn't enough. I felt like it was a little condescending, and it was white people having conversation in a public way that did not include the people who were being spoken about. It was taken off our list, and we got everybody else on board with other books. So folks are reading 2 selections this summer, and during our orientation week, we will be committing 2 full days to assembling our new library and having ABAR education for the faculty members and a weekly program for our parents as well. And that will last for the first 2 months of school in lieu of our regularly scheduled parent ed programs. You know, I can't walk around saying I'm so proud of what we're doing because it's never going to be enough, really. But we are, we're not buying any other wonderful storybooks other than books that will expand our ABAR offerings. We have a lot of different kinds of families, although not as much diversity in the proportions of the global majority in our family communities, but that has something to do with where we live. So one little nugget that I thought was really helpful that got our parents talking about a year ago was the piece in Nurture Shock, the book by, I forgot the last name of the, maybe someone can help me there. And there is sort of a macro study in that book talking about racism with white families and white children. And that was something that was put together, I don't know how many years ago, that Merriman and anyway, you guys can look that up. That was sort of just the tip of the iceberg 5 years ago. We had a diversity coordinator from another Montessori school come to our school so that we would have a Black man reading stories of black children, gay families, mixed families. And I just unabashedly was told by a parent that I was racist for bringing a Black man in to read. And I said, there is no other way for our children to learn about the brilliance of their brothers and sisters unless they see, feel, talk, hear, listen, experience, especially where we live. So I don't know if that was what we were going to talk about, Cindy, but that's a start for us. Yeah, I guess I'm feeling frustrated as a head of school that there is almost, for me, and this is personal for me as a head of school, that there's almost too much gentility about saying, that's not going to cut it, that's not enough, that doesn't fly. What more can we do? What more can our parents do? What more can our teachers do? And saying that every single day, what more is there? What more work is ahead of us on this day? What more work is ahead of us for this month and then this year? So having a plan makes a really big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you, Marnie. Thank you so much. And yes, that is what I wanted. So, Kathy, I would imagine you have a couple of other people with hands up or comments in the chat. And
you know, I see, and I'm not sure if I say your name right. Celia Clifford. I see that you have but and I'm going to call on you next, and I'm going to watch because it's hard for me to see your actual physical hand go up because there's so many screens. So if you can you're going to be next. What I'd like to remind everybody, if you can do the electronic raising of your hand, which I think you have to click on participant.
Yeah, I'm always on
You're okay. No, you're okay. We're already called on you.
Oh, okay.
So you go ahead. You go ahead and make your comment, and then I'll watch for others. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm Alcelia Jones Clifford, and I am an old-time Montessorian that started 7 urban Montessori schools in greater Cleveland, East Side and West Side and South Side. And I like to call it culturally relevant. So I think I saw your face somewhere before, Cindy. I don't know where. I am retired now from Cleveland State, but I don't seem to be able to do it well. And so now I'm working for Jackie Miller at Stonebrook. I was their founding president. I don't know if you know Jackie, but I'm sure you probably do. I am finishing culturally relevant parent training. And I like culturally relevant. I dislike racism. And that's because I had to go through it all. So after this last incident, my brother had to really help me. I said, I know they're not killing a Black man on television. That is like lynching. I've never seen that. But I'm not going back to all of the things that I've seen, but most of my life has been wonderful. I was able to go to a school around the cultural gardens, and we were Black and white until the bank, which Cindy was talking about when I finished talking to my son, did the redlining to move us, the Black folk, up the street where you had to go past the people that drank. Well, our parents were dynamo. How long did you think we stayed there? 1 year. Those teachers were hideous. And so that's where I'd like to begin. I've found the most engaging things to do is parent engagement. And so starting with each parent, I don't care where they're from, knowing you love their child, you're happy they're here. And I don't know what happened to the touching and the hugging. Oh, guys, let me tell you, all of the white Montessorians were scared to come over to Marada Montessori schools. But they had heard so much about it. And I was so nervous. But they came. And I was so happy, and I was hoping nothing would go wrong. And don't you know, a car got stolen. And I told them, oh, just have a seat and have some more snacks. I'll be right back. And I had to go out to the gas station and tell them I just called the councilman, and I mean, they better find that car because we've invited someone into our neighborhood now, and it's going to be peaceful. So sometimes it may take a little boldness. So from that, there's a number of wonderful things that have come out. Books of for early childhood centers, not Montessori centers. Well, let me say Montessori hasn't introduced it. but Cindy, maybe you know it. The early childhood environmental rating scales look at what is supposed to be in a early childhood, in an elementary, in a, pre-K, toddler classroom, to make it quality. And it says you have to have every single culture of a book. So inclusiveness is the first. You see, if we say too much about racism, then the other folk are gonna feel like, well, what are they talking about racism for? We have to be inclusive, which I put that, or I used to put that under practical life and our practical life skills, and waiting on the parents as they come in. They can have a seat and we could give some tea. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to say, because I have many articles to send you, Cindy, is the language. Well, there's been multicultural language forever. Don't you guys remember Maya Angelou at the inauguration of President, what was he, Clinton? Well, in the elementary classroom now of my grandson that was in the 9 to 12 classroom, Montessori classroom, of course, okay? I was invited in. And this is what I read to the children. And it names every single culture from the beginning of time. And it's beautiful. And you know what the children said? They were sitting there. They said, well, what's a kite? I said, I don't know. Let's look it up. All right? It was every nation represented in this. So look it up. Those children had so much fun. I didn't expect it. The only thing I wanted to do was to sit on the floor without falling. You know, man, he said, Cece, please don't fall. All right? But there is a plethora of wonderful things that I collected over the years. And I would love to share them with you. I heard about you. Jackie has told me all about you. And so kudos to you. Keep the fight going on. I'm finished.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're all fighting. Thank you.
So I don't see any hands up, which is quite unusual for our group.
I just have to log in for just a sec off my cell phone.
Tim, go ahead.
We did an article about your school so many years ago at Tomorrow's Child. I so admire the work you did in Cleveland. You're one of my heroes.
Oh, thank you. Who are you? I know you. If you're old and I'm old, we know.
We know each other. I'm Tim Selden.
Oh, hi, Tim. Do
How
you
are
still
you, my
write
friend?
the news, the news
We do.
magazine?
Yeah, Tomorrow's Child.
Okay.
Montessori Family Alliance. And
I gotta send my stuff out there. Yeah.
We would love it.
Okay.
Please do.
Okay.
I will put my email in the chat.
All right, great. Thank you.
And Celia, people are asking about the title of the book. That was the Maya Angelou, the Pulse of the Nation, I think.
On the Pulse of the Morning.
Okay. On the Pulse of the Morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Tanya is helping me watch for hands going up, so we'll be watching for that. There have been quite a number of resources being shared in the chat, so make sure that you look at that.
And what I want to say to you while people are chatting or preparing to speak up is that, and I saw just briefly that someone mentioned that that's why we have our cultural curriculum in Montessori. And yes, we do. However, our cultural curriculum has not been robust enough to connect with the children that we have and the families that we have in our schools. And so I call upon you to take that piece and to look at how we can change things, because the world has changed. And so we need to be responsive to that. And people are getting hurt because other people are treating them badly. And a part of that has to do with the experience that we have of each other and the lack of recognition that we have for each other and our right to be human beings and our right to be able to be here, and our human tendency, which has come from ages ago, to dominate others and to choose to consider them less than others. And we cannot permit that. And a part of that means that we've got to make our curriculum more robust and inclusive. And we have to start where we have the greatest deficit. And then we have to build from there. Kathy, do you want to share?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments here about things. First of all, there's multiple resources, as I've said, that have been shared, and so I appreciate that. Marnie says, talking about racism is the most important job of white educators. It makes social justice and social emotional learning a whole child experience. Let's see, let me go back up because a lot of its resources. Kenya says, I believe that we are all human and every race should be taken into consideration. We're a melting pot, therefore content of the character should be our #1 priority. We're asking for books to recommend, and I know some of the resources have been added to that, and Sarah, you have done that a number of times.
Yes, I did add a collection. My list has grown long, so I put a document in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
Has links to about half a dozen or more, maybe there are 8 by now, different resources.
Okay, thank you.
For social justice of every ilk.
Yeah. And Caitlin says, when making materials and you're including pictures of people, be mindful of what race as well as what gender is being reflected, making a conscious choice of representation. Completely agree of making it not the discussion point. I think somebody had referred to not teaching racism, but having those representative opportunities in the classroom.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, and that's a whole other conversation for another time, but that when we talk about gender, we need to take care there too.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to pinpoint people into binaries, and we need to recognize that there is gender fluidity and always has been gender fluidity, and it's a part of what we also need to recognize in our Montessori classrooms.
Most definitely. Okay, Nevera says, is the fear of parental discomfort an acceptance of white fragility? Can we challenge the families to look past their own comfort zone? I will tell you, Cindy, this is a common question we're hearing, and a common fear that many educators and school leaders are having is, what is the parent's reaction? And how will we cope with that? And what will we do? So I turn that over to you, my friend.
Yeah, I have had a number of people who have brought that up. And, you know, first of all, I have to say that somewhere, somehow, and the when is now, that we have to be courageous. If we want to switch this up, we have to be courageous. And we also have to recognize that for so long, it has been the other way around, and we have silenced people of color because they have not been able to see themselves in their classroom. And somewhere we have to be able to say, we made a mistake. We made a mistake, and now we're going to fix the mistake. It has absolutely nothing to do with the educator and their own personal sense of self. It has to do with society and this invisible liquid of racism that has been permeated through the world for so long, and that this is the time now to do something about it. And so parents need to be educated. It's the greatest contribution that we can do right now, is to attempt to dissolve this, to attempt to knock it apart and down. And so educate parents about what the curriculum is, and expand that curriculum, and provide information to your children courageously and valiantly, and in the name of all of the children who did not have it before. Because we have been very comfortable, if I can so say it, we've been very comfortable to do it the other way around to children of color. And that is such a disservice to them. And so the time now is to change that up. And I agree with the people who said it's important that we do character development, and it's important that we talk about all cultures. Yes, it is, but we're so not quite there yet, and we've got to start where there has been such a lack. And we need to be able to pull that up. And so educate parents, and in all courageousness, continue to do it.
Yeah, there's remedial work to be done. So it's great to say it's for everyone. And I think everyone agrees with that. But we have remediation that has to be done specifically on this issue. Now I do have multiple hands up. This is a pretty active time. Go ahead, Tanya.
We have Tamiko Porter doesn't know how to raise her hand, but she'd like to be recognized at a point.
Okay, so I have Stephanie first, and then I'm going to go to Lisa, and then we'll go to Tamiko, and I'm watching the others, so we'll get there. But Stephanie, if you could unmute.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again, Cindy, for running this amazing program. And Acelia, I loved hearing your stories. I feel like I could listen to you all day. And it's really nice to meet you. I just wanted to share a story that had a really profound effect on me as an educator. And I was listening to an interview with the author, Sherman Alexie, and he's a Native American descent. And the interviewer said, do you have a book or an author or, anything that kind of like made you think you wanted to be a writer? And he said, oh yes, that book is called The Snowy Day. And I don't know if you guys know that book, The Snowy Day. It's a children's book. And the author said, wait, what, the children's book? Why would that have been the book? And he said, well, I went to school, and wherever I was, I always saw books with white children, white faces, and I thought books were not for me. And when my teacher, whoever showed him that book, and he said that was the first time I ever saw a brown face in a book. And that's when I realized that books were also for me. And I just always hold that in my mind, that if any child thinks books are not for them, that's a crime. So I think the books and the visuals are so incredibly important. And now I ask my students that I teach child development, and I started to ask my Montessori students, adult learners, and we got a lot of work to do. I say to them, when people walk into their room, your classroom, how do they know they're welcome? And a lot of times people don't understand what that even means. So again, with the pictures and the books, and we have to make sure that people are welcome. And then the next thing, I just have to do one little sort of pitch. I just got this book called Tiny Stitches, And it's about Vivian Thomas, just like you're talking about. You know, we need to know who has done this work. And so I read this book to my family. I made them sit down. I have 17-year-old twins and my husband, and they were going to listen to a picture book. And then we looked it up and we found a movie about his story. And again, the injustice that was done to him and his work, again, is criminal. So read the book, watch the movie, and ask your teachers who is invited and welcome in your classroom. Thank you for listening.
Oh, Stephanie, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Okay, I think it was Lisa next. I'm keeping a list, so thank you for those of you who are helping me with this. We'll go ahead with Lisa Reiner next.
And there's also someone named Marwa who has her hand up. It's not an electronic hand, Kathy.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll get that too.
Hello, how are you?
Oh.
I'll lead in tailing on Stephanie's. I was thinking when we were talking about doing hard things of a couple things. One of our elementary teachers is famous for responding when kids like my son say, it's hard, to aren't you glad you can do hard things? We need to do hard things. And if I avoided every hard conversation or conversation I dreaded with my teenagers, we would not talk a whole lot. The conversations are complex, but they're important. And this is vitally important to humanity. And it's our responsibility to do that. And I think what the people around us in Montessori and the people who choose us for Montessori and to be that person choose us for is for our humanity and is for our integrity and is for our willingness to do hard things and to say hard things. Because if we weren't going to do that, I'm not sure how much they would trust us with their kids and educating their kids. We need to have hard conversations, whether it's a struggle the child's having or a struggle the country's having or the struggle the planet's having. It's just really important. And I think we can do it with sincerity and humility and objectivity as much as possible. But it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see, we have Tamika next. If you can unmute, Tamika.
Hello, it's Tamiko.
Tamiko, sorry about that.
That's okay. Changes the whole context of the name.
Yes.
So I came at it from I come from a different country, came to America as almost an adult. So it kind of gave me a different, and I grew up in a world that was very different. But it's funny because people judge me obviously from what I look like. And so I get kind of the flip, but I have raised a bunch of fosters and adopted kids, and my school is incredibly inclusive. One day we had to take a listen. So it's been great because we have children from everywhere. And what had got me to want to try to put my hand up, and for some reason I couldn't figure it out, my son tried and helped, and we couldn't get it, was not my staff. From where I am, just as predominantly white, but we have religious and LGBTQ staff. And to get parents aware of that. Two of my main staff are actually a couple together. One happens to be my daughter, who have a child. And the response from parents was very eye-opening when it happened, and yet it didn't even bat an eye. A lot of my foster/adopt children are different, or whatever, for what norm differences are. And parents have a hard time when they see my group of 8 that are very different of, wait, you're the mom of all of them, and how did that happen? And then when I added that kind of aspect to it, it really was eye-opening, but it starts a lot of tremendous conversations with the parents. And it's funny because the kids, our students, we're a small school, 85 students. The students really don't bat an eye, but I always know when it's discussed at home because the kids come in with the questions of how did that happen? And my library is very diverse, and I've made sure to be very inclusive. At one point in my life, I'm a natural redhead, back when I was younger, and I lived in a world where I was the first such seen child, first such seen person, and people used to come up and pet me because they couldn't figure out how I came to be. What my color was wrong, they kept trying to wipe it off to children trying to braid my hair because it looked wrong. So when I came to America and saw things very differently, I wanted a school that no child ever felt that way. And it was vitally important to me. And then when I got children who weren't accepted for who they were, it was vitally important to me that that never happened to other children. And so in our school, we have a very big mixture, but it is funny because that's what poked my head up. How do you get parents to understand that? We have lost families. When they realized that I hired a gay teacher, wait a minute, there's a lesbian on staff and she's near my kid. What do you mean? What's going to happen? We lost some families this year when I hired an Indian teacher. We're unhappy, and it was funny. It was some of my Indian families who were very angry that I dared to not hire a white one. And what was very funny is I had parents who came to me, and very funny in a sad way, who wanted a good white one like me, American. At which point we explained that I'm not American, and and she was. And they judged by according to looks, which brought up a lot of discussion in our school, and a lot of intolerance. We have less numbers, shall we say, going back because I made it very blatantly clear, and the COVID really kicked it up. Parents then were mad about that, brought it all together. Well, this is because you hired lesbian, because you hired non-American. And we shall say we start the new year with less children than we ended with. And a lot of that is that grouping of parents, and they became very vocal about it, which was just shameful in today's day and time. But I did want to say that biggest thing is there's some great books out there about my two mummies, my two daddies, or what I am. And we have them out, and they're always out for the children. We do books in every section we represent during the school year, and we'll bring out. And that area is very prominent in our program, along with Color, Just Like Me, and some other great books that we use with our kids. So thank you. This was really timely for me. And it was nice to hear that others have heard that kind of same thing, because I was starting to feel like we were getting shot for what I didn't know. So thank you.
Thank you, Tamiko. We have a question about where do you live? Where is your school?
Our school is in Massachusetts, Norwood, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And we have the very first high school in Massachusetts, which brings out a whole lot of other questions.
Yeah. So we have a number of hands up. I've been making a list, and I will get to you. I do want to say that Amy has put a comment in here about, I've thought about having our middle school, high school students do a diversity audit of our classroom libraries. Productive idea, she asks. Maybe even lead it for all levels of the school.
Can I answer that?
Please.
So I'm assuming that she means an audit of the books in the libraries in terms of a diversity. And I would say it's a wonderful idea, and it would be helpful for them to look at it not from whether or not there are books about people of color, but what's the content of the book? How do they portray them? That's what makes the difference.
Wow. Thank you for that clarification. I'm going to go to Christine next, and then Marnie. Both have their hands up. So Christine, if you can unmute.
Thank you. I just wanted to suggest that I know the focus of today is about classrooms, but when we're thinking about our schools, I wonder if the Montessori community could start thinking about how we intentionally enroll people of color into our schools. Teachers, yes, but families too. When I started my first school in North Carolina, that was an important part of the mission, and I was able to go to pediatricians' offices when I knew that they had a Black pediatrician on staff. I was able to go to some Black churches as well and speak with pastors about Montessori and the benefits and the values for all children. So that might be a place to think about. And then I was also very fortunate that we lived within driving distance of a major university that had an international students center. And connecting with them, we were able to have people from all over the world come into the classroom. Some chose to come in traditional dress, some came with traditional instruments, some came and made traditional food. And it was a wonderful way to expose our students to the world of people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Next is Marnie, and then we're going to go to Karen Kelly.
Hi, I wanted to share another tool for classroom work that I have seen be incredibly powerful. And some may be familiar with visual thinking strategies. It's I don't know if folks know Joanne Cosentino, and visual thinking strategies is a workshopping process that you can do with anyone of all ages, for parents as well as children. And it's a very specific rubric for workshopping visual art, three-dimensional or two-dimensional, with a group. And it's especially powerful when you use Black art, Black imagery, social justice imagery, the images, beautiful images of the struggles of Indigenous people, of people of color. These images, especially the ones that I mentioned in the comments, through amplifier.org. And amplifier.org is a clearinghouse of art that is just, it's an extraordinarily, it's all social justice art. And I've been using their artwork to do this visual thinking strategies program with young children, in which you're asking for children to look at what they see and to unpack what they share is what they see, help them find new language and additional vocabulary to talk about color and feelings and what things look fair, what things aren't fair, why they think those things, based on what they're actually seeing and what the artist is actually saying with their visual imagery. And the social justice piece that comes into play when you use visual thinking strategies with children is this magical combination for all the members of the community to unpack their own bias in this incredibly welcoming, warm, and supportive environment where there is space for everyone to be heard and to do listening. We do it with children who are as young as 2.9. Granted, their attention span is a little bit shorter, and we do it with our adults during parent ed programs and our faculty. So if you have a chance to look up visual thinking strategies, VTS, and its use with young children around social justice, you will absolutely get hooked. It's an extraordinary process. Thanks.
Thank you, Marnie. And Tanya. Yeah, Tanya put the link into the chat box, so thanks for that support, Tanya. Cindy, is that something you're familiar with?
Yes, yes, okay. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful tool for children. Well, it's a wonderful tool for anyone, actually. But
so Karen Kelly is next. Then we go to Marwa, and then to Helen, and then we get to John. So just so you know what your order is, I don't want anyone getting impatient with the process. We have a lot of listening to do, and listening is an important thing for us to be doing right now.
Okay, thank you. And Cindy, I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning the sexuality concerns and awareness that we should have. I have a child who's transgender, and that's been an eye-opening experience for our whole family. But also this child was brought up through Montessori and is really working to try to figure out how to make that work better for other people in the future. So it's pretty cool. I just, again, want to say thanks. I've taught for 20 years at the middle school level in Montessori, and how the Children's House or primary, lower L and upper L teachers did such a phenomenal job preparing kids for the 7th and 8th grade level. And we did a number of different trips. We took about 4 different trips to the South, and we would do civil rights. Because we're in New England, I'm in Massachusetts, we had to go places, more off to places where we could find people of color, and trying to help with the curriculum that they learned about. We read letter from Birmingham jail, and we did awareness of the A Long Walk Home, The Great Debaters, biography of King, etc. And the kids had an opportunity to be in Atlanta at the Tuskegee University at Montgomery and in Birmingham as well. And these kids were really moved by that whole experience. And so I highly recommend for upper L and middle school Montessorians to really just get kids out, if they can get out into the world and experience that. I just have a quick question. I'm working on a social justice certificate at Harvard's Extension School. And my passion right now is to figure out how to stop being silent and to try to figure out how to get Montessori out to people more than just white upper middle class people. And any ways that you or anyone else here can recommend how I could spend my time. I'm 61, I still have some years left, and I would really love to get it out there, but I'm not sure how to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. And Karen, I just want you to hold the thought that not next week, but the week after, we're going to be talking about what schools can do. And so those couple of weeks you might listen in, because that's part of the challenge, what the challenge will be.
I'm not connected to any school. You mean like Harvard?
No, just that our topic is going to be just in general, what schools can do.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, scholarships is what is going to come up.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And hopefully that outreach, Cindy, as we talk about what schools can do, it's what we all can do to encourage and educate people about Montessori education in all of our walks of life, right? So I think there's a part that schools are a part that's personal responsibility in this too, and how we share outside of that. Let's see, Marwa is next. So Marwa, if you could unmute, I think you have.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Yep. Hello.
Hello, I am from UAE, Abu Dhabi. It's time now 12 a.m.
Oh my goodness. Welcome.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. My name is Marwa Al-Gubaisi. I am the chairman from the Montessori Children's Garden in Abu Dhabi. It's a nursery, but I make a school in Abu Dhabi. I will graduate from PhD from Economic and Society in Paris University. I would like to share everybody about the racism between the children, even adult. But I want to ask one question for everyone. Our father Adam, what his color? He's white or black? Thank you. You understand. You got my point. Nobody know what his color. We all come from one father from different color. We have to respect our father. We have to respect our colors. We have to respect human, only father and Eve. That's why I would like to teach my children, as I believe we have one father. What about difference? Sometimes colors about the highest or short, the talls, what I mean, fat or thin. In the end, everybody is a human. We have to respect, we have to teach our children and to learn them. We are from one father. Father brings different colors. We have to respect that. Different tall and even bullying between children. We have to respect what God He gave us from color or our body style or whatever. That's why I would like to give you for everybody or for me short logic things. We come from one father. We have to respect this to teach our children. No colors. We are all human. And this is what I like to say for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwa.
Thank you for sharing.
I have to say this. I'm sorry. Before Dhabi, here you are. It's wonderful you're saying that. Some people will attack you because you say one father. Say one blood.
Yes.
I will take your blood any day. I'm 69 years old, now I take your skin too, all right? And so it's undoubtedly proven in science. If our blood matches, it can go in anyone. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I love you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia.
So I want to just pass on a little piece, which is that it's so true that what we hope for is that the world can get to a place where we all recognize that we are one human race, one race of people, I'll put it that way. But right now, it is the situation that we are discounting of certain races and of certain colors. And we want to hold up the race of children. We want to hold up their color. We don't want to mesh it into one color because we are many colors and people are judging people based on that color. And we want to teach children to honor their color, to take pride in their color, to love their color, and to love the color of other people. But it starts with them being able to love their own color, and particularly now when the color of their skin has had such a detrimental effect on so many people. We want them to be able to walk with their head high regarding who they are, and to know how to push back on people who have been treating people differently because of the color of their skin.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Cindy. And I think that I want to say to everyone, thank you for the respectful tone of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are some things that are said that sometimes trigger some reactions and responses. And I just appreciate that people are willing to listen deeply and understand where people are coming from and what their intention in being here is. So I appreciate that. We are really short on time, but I want to give Helen and Jonathan a chance to have a quick comment. So Helen, if we can go to you and you can unmute. I know you've put some things in the chat, but you've had your hand up for quite a while. So I'd like to.
I have to tell you, thank you, everybody. I think this is such an amazing forum, we've been doing. And I also have to tell you, I really admire anybody who can sit here and talk and just sound so calm. I am a nervous wreck. I'm so anxious right now. So if my camera goes off, that's why. We parents and we send our children out into the world when they're 3, 4, 5 years old, and they have to learn to kind of fend for themselves and to make sense of the world. Even if it's just for, the school day. So that being said, I have been thinking about race and racism for the last 47 years, because I didn't go to school until I was in kindergarten. So either something about racism has affected my life, on a daily basis, or I've been actively thinking about it, even if I didn't know that it was called racism. But this last week, I've really been thinking about it a lot because of all of our conversations from last week. And I hate to beleaguer the whole color thing that I keep talking about, but people of Western European descent, they made this system where they broke everybody up into colors. And how are we going to change that? And I was thinking, what can I personally do to change this? I can vote. I can, talk to my legislators. I can write letters. I can be as good a Montessori guide as I possibly can be and be inclusive. And I understand why we have to kind of focus on African Americans, because they are, I would say, the most kind of stamped down color or group of people right now, and they do need to be highlighted. But I think it's really important to include all cultures, in the classroom, and and really being mindful about, representing as many different cultures as possible. I personally really try not to use black, white, unless absolutely necessary. I try to say African American, Asian Americans, Latino, Hispanic. I think it makes it more personal, and it's more human. I don't know what else to call white people. I personally would like to call them pink people, because they're not really white. And pink power has a completely different, visual image than white power. And I'm not making a joke about this. If we're going to change the system, we have to really think about how we address people, how we think about our own biases. If somebody says something that we might not agree with, we have to catch ourselves when we start thinking, oh, they're colorblind, or they're, whatever that expectation is. We've got to ask questions like, what do you mean by that? Really try to connect, because we're all Montessorians. We're here willingly. But what if, we're talking to a parent who doesn't want, or isn't open, or is really, set in their ways. So we've just got to think about all that, and just keep talking to each other. And that's all. Oh, and I was thinking again about the color. What do you do about Asians? They're not yellow. I don't want to be called yellow. And try walking up to a Native American and call him a red man. That is so bad. It's a lot to think about, and I think a lot of it's very confusing, and it's going to take time, decades, years, maybe centuries to change this. But we all just have to keep, trying and be open, have open hearts, and that's all. I'm sorry I went on so long.
No, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And it is a lot. And I coined this term, cultural recontextualization, that is hard to say, but is so true, that we really have to recontextualize culture in a way that we never have before, in order to be able to move past this.
Yeah. And Helen, you've really shared a lot and helped us look at things differently in the past few weeks. So thank you for that.
Oh, I also have to say, my parents were denied a house in the 50s in Massachusetts. My dad had set up the whole thing. He went and found the house. Of course, my mother didn't get any input on what kind of house they were going to buy. But she showed up to sign the papers, and the realtor took one look at her and said, "I'm sorry, this house is no longer available." No explanation, that was it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go to Jonathan and then let Cindy wrap up. I know that we're a few minutes over, so bear with us. I appreciate you hanging in there. I think that, it's just as important as we can to end on time, but I also want to hear from Jonathan and have Cindy have the final word. So Jonathan?
I just want to say, Helen, I really appreciate your sensitivity or encouraging us to have sensitivity about the language we use. I'm so encouraged that sports teams are getting rid of their biased names. So thank you for highlighting language, Helen. Cindy, I wanted to go back to the issue of parent discomfort with our diversified curriculums, diversified classrooms, diversified schools. And while I so thoroughly support that we have to be bold and encourage them to look at to right the wrongs that have been done and to look at history with a new light and to look at their own biases, it also feels to me that we have a job as Montessorians to help parents extend beyond the current demographics of their neighborhoods and the classroom right now. It's not about their child now. It's what kind of a world is their child going to be entering? And as you've often pointed out, Cindy, these children that we're teaching today, they're going to be entering a world of more and more diversity and more working and living with people of color. So I think we need to help parents understand, yeah, you might have an all-white classroom or all-white school or all-white neighborhood now, or all-black neighborhood or all-black school now, but what do you want to prepare your children for? What is the reality of what they're going to be experiencing as adults? And even if they weren't going to be experiencing that as adults, what kind of a world do you want? Do you want a world where we continually disenfranchise people and polarize people? Or do you want your children and grandchildren to be in a world where we're a united human family? I think we need to raise the bar beyond the current environment of families and school demographics and look at what's the big picture. Montessori is about the big picture. We're about cultivating adults of the future.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan.
So Cindy, the final words are yours, and I would encourage you to let us know what the topic is for next week so we can be prepared for that as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we touched on the classroom. we touched on our need to be able to do more. And I gave you a couple of examples at the beginning. And so next week, we're still in the classroom because I want you to come back telling me what needs to change or what needs to be opened up. And I want us to be able to create that as a group of courageous Montessori educators and other people who are here. And I want to say other people and more people who are here to enhance our conversations. And so go back and think about what needs to be done differently. What is it that we have to add to our curriculum? What is it that we have to change in our curriculum? How is it that we can allow children of color to see themselves? How is it that we can allow children who are not people of color to look at people of color differently because they've stepped into your classroom, into your school, and because they've been educated differently? And so that's a part of your challenge. And so next week is the continuation of the classroom. And then the next 2 weeks after that, we're going to talk about schools in general and what can we do so that we do not have classrooms and schools that are colonizing children and that are moving toward anti-racism. And Sarah, I sent you a message because we're going to also talk about racism and how that whole color thing came up, and someone mentioned that today. And so we may incorporate that either into next week's or into the week after that. So your homework is thinking about your classroom, and it's also looking at that YouTube called Teachers Talking About Race in Education and looking at how other teachers view it. So I hope that you will work on that. Kathy, I know I saw in the chat a few people asking, is it possible to have a continuing ed certificate for this? And I will put that in your hands to determine whether or not that is possible or not.
Okay, we'll talk about that and see and let people know about that. And then I just want to say thank you to both Sarah and Cindy and to everyone who participated today. We are looking forward to next week being together and talking more about the classroom issues. So.
And Kathy, can we steal 2 minutes to give to Marnie because she had something that she really wanted to mention?
Well, I'm happy to spend an extra 2 minutes, and I'll just let everyone, make their own decisions. But Marnie, please go ahead.
Are you reading my comments?
I saw that you were saying something, so
I have a fire that is a little bit blinding me to other perspectives right now, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I think you might have read it, Jonathan, and it's absolutely nothing personal to you, but when we talk about educating parents because their children need to get used to being in a racially and more globalized world, I think we really need to take off the kid gloves. I think that it's not enough to say, well, we want you to do this so your children will be comfortable in the bigger world with, it's not an option. It's not a service we're offering to white people so that their children will do better. And I think that one of the things that I'm working on most personally as a head of school, as a leader to my faculty and to my parents, and then by trickle down through them to the children, is that we need to constantly watch out for centering whiteness because it happens without knowing it all the time. And I know that that is not your intention, Jonathan, or anybody's here, because everyone is here with just a full heart of generosity and the best intentions. But when we say, well, when white parents are worried, well, you know what? That's really just, I'm sorry. It's too bad that you're worried that your child doesn't understand, because actually your child probably understands a whole lot better than you do. And that's not something I'm going to say in this manner, in that forum, but
decentering whiteness is the work of the moment. There is no way we can get to the other side without that. We got to let other people go through the door before us. We have to have all of our books be representative of people other than white people. Everything has to be about this because there's just no other way to catch up, make up, forgive, or be forgiven. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, Marnie.
I just end with the child. I have 3 Afro-Latino grandchildren. And my son works for the Eaton Corporation. And so we've had to move to many cities. In South Carolina, we went to another AMI school. And of course, Gabriel was the only one of color. I didn't know what was going on. My son tries to keep me out of stuff. But he asked me on Martin Luther King Day to say something to the kids about it, and I was shocked. And all of a sudden, I saw little Gabe, 4 years old, shake his head like this. I said, well, what, Gabe? He said, it happened to me. Now, so I said, how? He said, well, Billy Joe, I asked him if he wanted to play with me. And he said, I can't because you're Black. And I said, well, what did you say? He said, I'm brown. I'm not Black. You're okay to play with me. Well, Billy Joe and Gabe had this ongoing discussion. And Gabe's parents took it from the point of view, you can talk to who you want to talk to, you're a child of God. And of course, they went in to the principal and to the teacher to sort of be a background. And yes, Billy Joe's parents had to come in also. But it was quiet, and it was left to the children, the 2 boys. Graduation came, a beautiful country club. And guess who was sitting down eating with Gabe? Billy Joe. That's where we're going.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Cecilia.
Back to you, Kathy.
I just want to say thank you. There's many, many thank yous for all of those of you who've made comments, shared resources, and particularly for Dr. Acker. Thank you for your time. I just want to remind everyone, Cindy and Sarah are volunteering their time and their energy. This takes a lot of preparation and work to do this, and it takes a lot of energy to deliver this. And so for that, we so are just our gratitude to you on behalf of everyone who's here and everyone who even couldn't make it today, because more people will be back next week. So thank you so much. We'll see you all next Friday, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.